That line still stings when I say it out loud. The image of her standing in the doorway, her hand wrapped around that shiny brass keyring, will never leave me. I can still see the faint smile tugging at her lips. Not warmth, not pride, something colder, something that said, "You should have known better." It wasn't supposed to be that way. When I first married Hamza, his mother, Mrs. Qureshi, welcomed me with open arms, or at least that's what I believed. She told me I was the daughter she never had. She'd hold my hands in the kitchen, guide me through her recipes, and tell me how a woman's heart keeps a home alive. I thought she meant it as love. I didn't realize it was a warning that the heart she wanted alive was hers, not mine. We lived in a small apartment for the first 3 years of marriage. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a narrow balcony that overlooked a noisy street. I didn't mind. We had love, and that was enough. I taught art classes to children in the neighborhood, while Hamza worked long hours managing his mother's family business. Most evenings, he came home tired but gentle. We'd eat together, talk about plans, maybe buy a small house one day. Then came the offer. It was a humid afternoon when Mrs. Qureshi called me over. I still remember the smell of sandalwood, incense in her living room, and the heavy ticking of the clock above the mantel. "My dear," she said, pouring tea with her usual precision, "it's time you both had a real home." I smiled, thinking she meant we should start looking. But then she slid a brown envelope across the table inside. "A property deed. This house," she said, her eyes gleaming with something that looked like pride, "belongs to the family, and now, it's yours. Consider it a wedding gift, late, but from the heart." I was stunned. "Amy, this is too much. We can't." She waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. A home should stay within family hands. Besides, I'm getting old. I'd rather see you both settled." I remember crying that day. Tears of gratitude, relief, disbelief. I hugged her, and for a moment, I believed her generosity was real. We moved into the house a week later. A graceful old bungalow with white shutters and a garden of jasmine and roses. It smelled like my dreams. I decorated every corner with care. Light curtains, soft rugs, framed photos. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But belonging, I learned, isn't always given. Sometimes it's borrowed until someone decides to take it back. The first sign came quietly, like a change in weather. Mrs. Qureshi started visiting often. At first it was weekly, then daily. She'd come with groceries, cooked food, sometimes even new cushions or curtains. "You need my touch here," she'd say. I didn't mind. She was family, after all. But gradually, she started moving things around, taking charge of the kitchen, the garden, even rearranging furniture. "This sofa doesn't belong there," she'd murmur. "This color doesn't suit the house." I'd laugh it off, though a small ache grew inside me each time. Hamza didn't see it. "She's just helping," he'd say. "You know how she is." I nodded, because I did know how she was: proud, controlling, used to obedience. But I also knew she'd given us that house. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Then, one morning, while watering the plants, I saw her standing near the gate talking to a young woman, maybe in her dressed in soft pink, carrying a box of sweets. They spoke quietly, and then Mrs. Qureshi smiled in a way I hadn't seen before, soft, approving, almost tender. When she saw me, her smile faded. "Oh, Mariam," she said briskly. "This is Nadia. She's a family friend." Nadia smiled politely. "Nice to meet you," she said. Her eyes lingered just a second too long. Something in my chest tightened, but I brushed it off. Paranoia was not something I wanted to feed. A week later, Mrs. Qureshi started hinting at changes, talking about future plans, about new family arrangements. I didn't understand what she meant until one evening, Hamza came home looking troubled. "Amy thinks we should move back to her house for a while," he said. "Why?" I asked, stunned. "She says it's better for her health, and for us to be closer." My heart sank. "But she gave us this house, Hamza. This is our home." He hesitated. "Just for a few weeks, maybe. She says she misses me." I wanted to protest, but his voice carried that familiar mixture of guilt and duty. So I agreed, though every part of me screamed not to. We packed light. I locked the front door myself, the brass key warm in my palm. I thought we'd return soon, but we never did. 2 weeks later, when I came back to collect some belongings, I found the locks changed. The jasmine vines I had planted were gone. A new car stood in the driveway. When I knocked, Nadia opened the door. Her expression was calm, almost kind. "Oh," she said, "you must be Mariam. Mrs. Qureshi said you'd come. My throat went dry. Where's Hamza? Inside, she said softly, but he's busy. I tried to push past her, but the door didn't budge. That's when I noticed it, the key in her hand. My key. And behind her, Mrs. Qureshi's voice, cool and measured. You should have known better, Mariam. You were only ever a guest in this house. My world tilted, the door shut slowly. The click of the lock was quiet, final. The house that had once felt like mine, my dream, my pride, had closed itself against me. The first few days after being locked out felt like I was floating in someone else's nightmare, a dream I couldn't wake from. I stood outside the gate for hours that day, my suitcase beside me, staring at the windows that used to glow warm with my laughter. I could still hear the echo of my mother-in-law's words, sharp and final. This house is not yours anymore. I remember knocking once, twice, again, until my knuckles hurt. The curtains moved slightly, someone watching, but the door never opened. Eventually, I dragged my suitcase down the street and took a rickshaw back to my cousin's small flat. She didn't ask many questions, just made tea and let me sit in silence. That night, I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks like they were days of my life falling apart. The following week was a blur of confusion and disbelief. Hamza, my husband, sent short messages. I'll handle it. She didn't mean it. Don't come right now. His words were soft, cowardly, like paper trying to stop a storm. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the woman who'd once smiled at me, pressing that small velvet pouch with the house keys into my palm, hadn't meant it all as a cruel joke. But the silence stretched too long. By the third week, I heard from a friend in the neighborhood. She said she'd seen another woman inside the house, younger, dressed in bright clothes, laughing with my mother-in-law in the garden. The same garden I had planted jasmine in with my own hands. The words didn't register at first. My brain refused to make sense of them. But that night, Hamza called, his tone distant, heavy. I think it's best if you stay with your cousin for a while, he said. I waited for the rest, the explanation, the reason, anything, but he said nothing more. The silence that followed said everything I needed to know. For days, I sat by the window, watching life move on, outside cars, children, people laughing. I felt invisible, erased. My mother's old saying echoed in my head, when someone shows you their heart, believe them the first time. I hadn't believed her. I thought kindness could soften cruelty, that patience could mend betrayal. But now, I knew some hearts are just cold, and some homes were never meant to shelter you. Still, a strange calm began to grow inside me. It started small, like a seed buried under rubble. I realized I could either stay broken, or I could build again, on my own terms. I began writing down everything, dates, messages, the day she handed me the keys, the deed transfer, even the picture my friend had sent. If they thought they could erase me, they had underestimated the woman who once turned an empty house into a home. The morning I decided to go back to that house, the sky was still gray, heavy with the promise of rain. I dressed simply, plain white shalwar kameez, no jewelry, just resolve. My cousin tried to stop me, said I'd only get hurt again, but I wasn't going there for closure anymore. I was going for the truth, and for proof. I reached just as the maid was sweeping the front porch. She froze when she saw me, guilt flashing in her eyes, before she whispered, "Madam, they said you moved abroad." My heart twisted. That's what they told people, that I'd left, abandoned everything. I smiled faintly and said, "Then it's good I came back to correct the story." I stepped inside without asking. Every corner felt both familiar and foreign, as if my memories had been rearranged to make space for someone else's life. The jasmine scent was gone. In its place was a perfume I didn't recognize. The walls were newly painted, photos replaced, and there she was, the new wife, standing by the staircase in a silk robe. She didn't look surprised. In fact, she smiled, as if she had been waiting. "You must be Aisha," she said calmly. "Hamza told me you'd come eventually." My breath caught. Every cell in my body screamed, but I forced myself to stay composed. "Interesting," I said quietly. "He never told me you existed." She tilted her head, almost pitying. "He said the divorce was mutual." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Mutual? I hadn't even seen the papers. That was when I knew something far bigger was happening behind my back. I left without another word, clutching my phone tight. That evening, I went to the local registry office. The clerk, an older man who recognized my name, hesitated before handing me the file. "Your husband transferred the property 3 months ago," he said, "to his partner's daughter. his new wife. My knees went weak, but I didn't cry. I simply stared at the document, the signature that once symbolized trust now marking betrayal. That night, under the dim light of my cousin's living room, I made a decision. No more silence, no more waiting for fairness from people who thrived on deceit. I gathered every document, every message, every voice note, and then I called someone I never thought I would, my husband's former business rival, Mr. Kamal, the man Hamza, once accused of jealousy and ambition. When I told him what had happened, there was a long pause. Then he said, "Meet me tomorrow. I think we can help each other." It was in that moment I realized I hadn't lost everything. I had just been pushed out of their world so I could start building mine, stronger, sharper, and impossible to deceive again. The next morning, I met Mr. Kamal at a quiet cafe on the edge of the city, the kind of place where people came to disappear. He was older now, his hair streaked with silver, but his eyes were the same sharp steel I remembered from Hamza's business meetings. When he saw me, he stood up politely and said, "I wondered when you'd come to your senses, Aisha." I didn't take offense. I'd heard worse. I just said, "I'm not here for pity, Mr. Kamal. I'm here for justice." He nodded slowly, then leaned forward. "Your husband didn't just betray you. He betrayed his investors, including me. The property transfer was part of a laundering scheme. If you help me prove it, we can both take him down legally." My pulse quickened. I didn't want revenge out of spite. I wanted truth, accountability. "What do you need from me?" I asked. He slid a small flash drive across the table. "His emails, financial records, or anything you still have access to. You used to manage his office, didn't you?" I nodded. "Then you know where the bodies are buried," he said quietly. That night, I went through every backup I had saved, not for revenge, but for survival. Late-night calls, transaction receipts, voice notes where Hamza mentioned shifting assets to his mother's account. Each one was a puzzle piece. I didn't sleep for 2 days. When I finally met Kamal again, I handed him a folder thick with evidence. He looked at me differently this time, not as a victim, but as an equal. "You're braver than most men I know," he said. I replied, "I'm just tired of being silent." Weeks passed, and soon enough, things started to unravel. Hamza received a notice from the corporate crime division. His accounts were frozen. His mother, who once looked down on me, called me in tears, begging to talk. I didn't gloat. I simply said, "You chose deceit over dignity. Now face the consequences." But the truth, even as I said those words, I felt no triumph, only a quiet ache, because I had loved them once, both of them. And betrayal doesn't just break trust, it breaks parts of you that never fully heal. Still, when I saw the news headline 2 weeks later, "Businessman and wife under investigation for fraudulent property transfers," I felt something close to peace. Not because they were suffering, but because justice, finally, was louder than their lies. That evening, as I stood outside the house that was once mine, the gates locked and the lights off, I placed the original key, the one my mother-in-law had handed me, on the doorstep. I whispered, "You took the walls, but not my worth." Months passed after the investigation, and silence became my closest companion. The house that once symbolized betrayal stood empty, its paint peeling, its windows clouded with dust. I didn't visit again. Instead, I rented a small apartment by the sea, 1 bedroom. Creaky floors, a balcony just wide enough for a chair and a potted plant. For the first time in years, I had space that was truly mine. I started teaching again, part-time, at a community school. The children didn't know my story, and that was a relief. To them, I wasn't the woman whose husband stole her home. I was just Miss Aisha, the teacher who brought extra cookies on Fridays. There was healing in the ordinary, the sound of chalk tapping the board, the smell of tea brewing in the staff room, the laughter of children echoing through hallways. I found fragments of myself in those small moments. Every day felt like a quiet reclaiming. One evening, as I sat grading papers by the window, I received a letter from the authorities, formal but freeing. It stated that the property deed had been annulled, and all fraudulent transfers reversed. My name was legally restored as part of the estate. I stared at that paper for a long time. Then, instead of crying, I smiled, not because I got the house back, but because I didn't need it anymore. When my mother-in-law called me weeks later, her voice trembled with something unfamiliar. Humility. "Aisha, I made mistakes. We both did. Hamza's gone abroad now, but I can't sleep at night thinking about what we did to you." I listened quietly. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, just distance. Calm, clean distance. "I forgive you," I said softly. But forgiveness doesn't mean returning. There was silence on the other end, then a sigh that sounded like surrender. Spring came, and with it, a new rhythm. I joined a women's group that helped others navigate financial independence after divorce. We shared stories over coffee. Different faces, same wounds. One woman said, "You talk like someone who's seen fire and come out with light instead of ashes." I laughed. Maybe I have. Now, whenever I think of that day, the day my mother-in-law handed me those keys, I don't see loss anymore. I see a lesson. I learned that homes can be taken, but dignity cannot. That the walls we build inside ourselves are stronger than any deed. Sometimes, at sunset, I sit on my balcony and watch the light fade into the water. The sky glows gold, just like the day everything began. And I whisper to myself, not in bitterness, but in peace, "You locked me out to take everything, but I walked away and found myself instead." Sometimes, life has a way of locking us out from homes, from people, from the comfort we thought we'd earned. But maybe, those locked doors aren't punishments. Maybe they're protection. When I stood outside that house with nothing but the clothes on my back, I thought I'd lost everything. Now I know I was being pushed toward something I couldn't see yet. My own peace, my own worth, my own voice. See. We women are taught to hold families together even when our hands are bleeding. We're told to smile when the floor beneath us gives way. But the truth is, strength isn't about staying inside a burning house. It's about knowing when to walk out and never look back. I still remember the sound of that lock clicking shut behind me. Back then, it echoed like betrayal. Today, it sounds like freedom, because when they closed that door, they didn't end my story. They just changed its setting. I built a new chapter, one where my name, my choices, and my peace belong to me. So if you've ever been locked out of love, of family, of a dream, remember this. Maybe that closed door isn't rejection. Maybe it's redirection towards something stronger, quieter, and truer. Would you have stayed and fought for that house, or would you have walked away like I did, to start again, from nothing, but with everything that matters? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, because every week, we share true stories of strength, love, and healing. Right here, with Auntie May. When they took my home, they thought they won. But what they didn't know is, I became my own home. A year later, I stood in front of a new house, smaller, humbler, but entirely mine. The walls were freshly painted in a soft shade of cream, and the garden out front was already blooming with marigolds and jasmine. The air smelled like rain and beginnings. For the first time in a long while, I turned the key in a door that didn't hold anyone else's shadow. I remember that first night. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, sat on the porch, and watched the sunset. The same golden light that once filtered through my mother-in-law's house now bathed my little home in warmth. And I thought to myself, this is what peace feels like. It isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It just is. Word eventually spread around town. Some said I was lucky to start over. Others whispered that I'd fallen from grace. But I didn't care anymore. Their opinions had no power over me, because I'd learned the hardest, most liberating lesson. My value was never tied to anyone's approval. Months later, I saw my mother-in-law again. It was at a local grocery store. She was older, frailer. She paused when she saw me, her eyes widening just a little. I expected bitterness to rise in me, but all I felt was calm. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain, but I simply smiled and said, "I hope you're well, Mama Evelyn." Then I walked away light-free and untouched by her ghosts. As I stepped outside, the afternoon sun hit my face. I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest revenge is living with dignity, not bitterness. She had taken away a house, but she had handed me something far more valuable, myself. And that, I decided, was the kind of wealth no one could ever lock me out of again.